Welcome to AASHTO Resource Q&A. We're taking time to discuss construction materials testing and inspection with people in the know, from exploring testing problems and solutions to laboratory best practices and quality management. We're covering topics important to you.
Welcome to AASHTO Resource Q&A. I'm Brian Johnson.
And I'm Kim Swanson, and we are here with Pete Unger. Brian, do you want to give him a little intro? I think you know him better than I do.
Yeah, so I met Pete years ago at an ASTM meeting, and several ASTM meetings in committee E36, which handles a lot of the quality management system requirements, particularly around ASTM E329, and also has handled the adoption of ISO standards, and Pete's going to probably clarify that a little bit here. But Pete is currently with International Quality Excellence in Infrastructure Systems, LLP, which I also want to ask you about. Pete, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much, Brian. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to talk about my history in the business of accreditation and where we emerged the quality management system standards and requirements for accreditation of laboratories. I started actually in the business of accreditation in 1976, joining as assistant coordinator of the National Voluntary Laboratory Accreditation Program, which was originally lodged in the Commerce Department. We moved out to MBS, which is now NAST. And during that time, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Commerce was negotiating with different countries in Denmark about the cross-border acceptance of test data. And they had started a conference in 1976, which turned out to be the International Laboratory Accreditation Conference, which then got turned into a cooperation, ILAC. At that time, I think the second year, in 1978, we hosted it in Washington, D.C., and I was the gopher going back and forth, passing notes back and forth as we negotiated what was the next step of cooperating in cross-border acceptance of test data. It was decided that we needed a standard for accreditation laboratories, which was the mechanism that everybody agreed around the table was the best way to assure competent laboratories and laboratory data. You could have confidence in the data coming from accredited labs. So we approached ISO, and that was rather than ASTM. And although we did make an attempt to offer ASTM as the place to do the standardization, and because ASTM had already done work. I mean, E548 and your favorite standard has been around forever. And in fact, it's maybe probably one of the first ones. Anyway, E548, some of the text was actually offered to develop Guide 25. And I got involved with actually sitting on the committees to write the damn thing. John Locke was my boss at the time at NEVLAP, allowed me to do all this travel to help, go to Geneva to help write the original guide and the standards. And I've been involved ever since. We also hosted NAVLAP and A2LA when I joined A2LA in 1985. We ended up helping to develop the peer evaluation process for recognition of accreditation bodies for the purpose of identifying appropriate accreditations of laboratories that were offering test data on exported products, basically. I've been involved from that ever from the get-go, chairing the Mutual Recognition Committee of ILAC, working with Asia Pacific, chairing that. I actually, long ago, I was chair of ASTM E36. And part of what I did at ASTM E36 was to encourage the adoption of the ISO standards, ISO guides, as US standards. And we E36 was the committee to do that process to support an ANSI designation as a standard, US ANSI standard. And I ultimately ended up chairing ILAC for 3 terms, about 9 years. So I've been involved in the effort forever. Retired from A2LA 10 years ago. I've been consulting ever since, working with various accreditation bodies, laboratories, certification bodies to help them meet the ISO standards and get qualified for accreditation. And in the case of accreditation bodies, I've of late been doing internal audits of accreditation bodies. Mexican body, Canadian body, a couple of US bodies. So that's what's keeping me busy. I've also done peer evaluations of accreditation bodies for the Inter-American Accreditation Cooperation and the Asia Pacific Accreditation Cooperation. I've been slowing down though since I've reached the ripe young age of 75. Cut back on my travel. I like to work a little bit more locally and remotely, actually. I've done a few things remotely. My most recent on-site effort was last December in Saudi Arabia, no less. So I ended up training aspiring lead assessors for the Gulf Accreditation Cooperation. Lead assessors for 17,025, the laboratory criteria document.
Was that an ASQ lead auditor certification, or was that just
no,
lead auditor training that you conduct?
I don't do the 9001 certification stuff. No, in fact, accreditation bodies don't necessarily buy into that at all. That's usually relegated to lead auditors of the quality management system standards, not the accreditation competence standards. At least accreditation bodies have resisted actually having to require everybody to be certified. I stood strongly against that concept, even though when ISO 9001 first came out in 1985, I made an effort to become trained and certified as a 9001 lead auditor on the original standard. The standard 9001 has radically changed, and I haven't really kept up with it. And I didn't keep up the certification because I was not doing ISO 9001 certification audits. There is, I believe, if you make an effort to be certified, you really have to demonstrate experience in actually applying 9001 or any of the other certification, management system certification requirements. Doing 17,025 assessments, I don't know whether they're actually counting that, although what is counted is 17,025 is treated as equivalent to 9001. So laboratories who get accredited to 70,025 can say to their customers, if the customer is saying you need to be 9001 certified, which we, adamantly object to, even those customers say that, there is a statement from ISO that basically endorses the fact that if you're accredited to 70,025, it's equivalent to ISO 9000 certification. Very important so labs don't have to go through the nonsense of getting certified in 9001 and can rely on their accreditation as the #1 way to demonstrate that I'm competent to provide decent results as to my customers. And I think that's held. And I believe internationally, the demand for 9001 certification of laboratories is really diminishing, going away, although I haven't been involved with laboratories accreditation for a long time. I think that's the case, Brian. I believe that's the case for you. You see people that are, some people are saying, well, we need 9001.
I have never had anybody ask me that question one time.
Okay, well, that's okay.
Yeah, I think you are. I think you are correct.
It did happen in the early 90s. Of course, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, right. Yeah, things were not fully resolved in that area at that point, I imagine.
Yeah.
I want to go back to kind of the beginning of the story. When you were formulating all of these policies and being involved in the very beginning in the mid 70s, the meeting you said the U.S. and Denmark were working on this together. What was there a particular product or material, or what was there a problem that was being solved at that point, a specific problem that Denmark and the U.S. were trying to resolve, or was it a general issue?
I think it was clear that U.S. exporters were very demanding of, why do we have to test the product twice? We test the product for European standards in the United States, and we send it to Europe, and they test it again. It's a cost, an unnecessary cost. We need to facilitate acceptance of test data. And how do we do that? In the mid 70s, they said we'd do it through accreditation. That's one of the reasons why NAVLAP got started. It was the first national system that created in the United States. What NAVLAP did not do, unfortunately, is develop a broad-based accreditation scheme for all types of laboratories. It started out with, what do we start out with? Carpeting, testing, thermal insulation, concrete. And it just simply, it was too arduous, and our U.S. lab community and some industry groups supported the creation of American Association for Laboratory Accreditation. When we created A2LA, obviously the point was to allow all kinds of laboratories to get accredited and get their data accepted overseas. That was the primary purpose initially of A2LA. Then it started to morph into the automotive industry decided, well, we need to have a system for assuring the competence of our supplier laboratory network. So General Motors really drove A2LA in the late 80s, big time, because they started requiring A2LA accreditation of all their supplier network, which included not just the United States, but overseas folks. So we had a need to cooperate internationally early on. When we tried to get recognized in Europe, they came over and did a peer evaluation of us and said, you know what, we can't accept you because you haven't authenticated the traceability. You don't accredit calibration laboratories. We as A2LA were not really widely accepted by the calibration community. When we go to the National Corporation for Standards Laboratories, I guess, NCSL, they said government should be doing it. Okay, let's get NIST to get NAVLAP started. And that's finally happened. And a few years later, we did get accepted under the fact that NIST NAVLAP started, and we were also accrediting Cal Labs. So we were able to demonstrate, authenticate traceability for Europe. And we did have a couple of bilateral recognition. And then, of course, ILAC came along and said, that's crazy, all these bilaterals, it's ridiculous. We need to have a multilateral agreement. Everybody's duplicating the evaluations of everybody else. In fact, when I started, John Locke supported me to do these bilateral evaluations. And so I got a lot of experience running around evaluating other accreditation bodies, and it got me started in developing the peer evaluation process. It's a fundamental role of ILAC and IF and the new GLOBAC. Primary purpose for having this cooperation is to recognize each other as providing acceptable accreditations. And Europe started the first cooperation, and then we had the Asia Pacific starting the second one, and we had a bilateral, and then the region started to develop the Inter-American Accreditation Cooperation, which I supported. We also supported ANACLA and North American, which actually wasn't workable because there weren't enough countries involved. And so I supported the Inter-American Accreditation Cooperation. A2LA had the first bilateral agreement in APLAC, Asia Pacific Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation, which they merged and become and integrated the accreditation bodies that are doing certification accreditation. And so now we're having ILAC and IAF merging, and it's going to be GLOBAC.
Okay, so IAF, New Zealand, ILAC, Netherlands, they're forming GLOBAC.
We did last March, actually, 15 months ago, the World Trade Organization's Technical Barriers Trade Committee actually published, finally, guidance on conformity assessment policy and procedures and requirements that governments may place. They recognize the ILAC and IF MLA. That was something, as ILAC chair, I went to 3 different TBT committee meetings promoting that concept. The World Trade, the TBT agreement actually recognizes accreditation as a mechanism to facilitate trade. But what they didn't do until this guidance was to say, what is an acceptable accreditation? So they have put in this WTO guidance on conformity assessment policy and procedures. Use the ILAC and IF MLAs as a means for recognizing competent accreditation. That to me actually was my number one international achievement, because I pushed that big time and pushed it with the US government, which has adopted it for quite a while. We do have some US government agencies that are recognizing the ILAC MRA, EPA, FDA, CPSC, and US Coast Guard, and let's see, the General Services Administration, I believe, has used it. Anyway, all of that stuff we lobbied long ago to get that done in the US. When we go to other countries, very little effort is made by these countries to get the MLA accepted. EA's peer evaluation process neglects it big time. And I was involved in evaluating EA a long time ago. In fact, the first step. They could care less about promoting the international agreements. They promote the European agreements.
So Pete, you mentioned MRA and MLA. What are those?
Sorry.
That's mutual recognition agreement. What's MLA?
Yeah, I'm sorry, multilateral agreement. The IAF decided to use the acronym or multilateral agreement, partly because MRA has been used by governments, mutual recognition arrangements used by governments. ILAC, in its early years, and in fact, APAC, insisted that MRA was not necessarily a government to government. It was accreditation body to accreditation. We're recognizing each other, and we promote the acceptance of equivalence of their accreditation. That still has persisted in ILAC. Now, what GLOBAC does, I suspect they might resort to just promoting MLA instead of MRA. One of the reasons, other reason why IAF was not liking the MRA process, because I think, and this is some speculation, but product certification bodies who have their own requirements for the product, such as UL, can't not really recognize another product certification body that's not using the UL standard as equivalent. So in other words, unlike laboratory accreditation, where if you're running the exact same test, you can recognize each other's test results. If it's an ASTM test, yeah, okay, an ISO test, and they're accredited for it, yeah, okay. The result that comes out, you can accept it as equivalent. But a product certification based on different standard or different specification for the product doesn't, there's no mutual recognition. So they say mutual multilateral arrangement, MLA, rather than MRA. I think that's the genesis of why they adopted MLA. IAF, the International Accreditation Forum, and they deal with accreditation of certification bodies, and their first effort was the ISO 9000 certifications. When they integrated product certification, the idea was you cannot recognize fully the results as equivalent to your results. So because of the different product standards. Anyway, I think that's the reason why MRA is not used by IF. And I suspect Globek, when they actually get everything merged and ILF and ILAC actually go away, they probably will adopt MLA as a less, and it's different than the government MRAs.
So you mentioned the TBT. I remember years ago looking at the TBT and not seeing really anything as a minimum expectation. Just, and correct me if I'm wrong, did it form before it had the ILAC MRA in it? It was based on whatever the lower or the whatever the minimum expectation was from the two parties involved in trade.
Actually, the TBT agreement, among other things, really encourages the minimum in terms of conformity assessment requirements. In fact, ideally, it's a rely on manufacturer's declaration of conformity, self-declaration of conformity. That's the least onerous requirement. Least. My limited experience in hearing from countries that decide they need third-party certification or some more stringent technical barrier, if you will, when the marketplace starts complaining about these unacceptable products, they force the governments into writing requirements for certification, accreditation, retesting, inspection. In particular, those regulatory bodies have conformity assessment requirements, which could be considered technical barriers. They're justified barriers because if they're consumer products, food particularly, geez, you don't want to have products that'll poison and kill people.
And in our industry, construction materials, cement is a big issue, right? You don't know what you're getting in the port. Testing has to be conducted before it goes into use because you don't know if you're getting cement or some other product in these bags or loosely cast in the hull of a ship or however it's transported over here. So there is a need for some oversight and testing once it makes a big journey, especially, and I can kind of understand that about Europe, how they would like to, they feel comfortable within the confines of their continent with what's going on, but maybe are not so about something making a longer journey or coming from a place where they have less stringent rules.
You remind me, I am helping out the Canadian Lumber Standards Accreditation Board, CLSAB. They accredit a dozen certification bodies that determine the quality of lumber. They export a whole bunch of lumber to the United States and overseas to Australia, Japan, countries that are tree deficient. They have been not forced, but encouraged to get their accreditation internationally recognized, so that the accreditation of the certification bodies and their data and the stuff that goes along with the labels on the lumber can be automatically accepted in Japan and Taiwan and Australia, and for that matter, the United States. They can have some confidence that the Canadian Lumber Standards Accreditation Board accreditation of the certification bodies that do this we can have confidence and acceptance, and we don't have to reinspect the whole load of lumber that comes in. Very expensive process to do it on import. And that clearly, there's a number of other products like that, I think. And you point out cement. Perfect. I'm sure there's other products that we import where we want to have confidence that the testing and the certification has been done properly.
For your work with the lumber industry, what is the effort to build that confidence with the importing country? What's the main objective? You're brought into work. How do you is it a relationship thing? Is it more inspections? Is it what happens?
I think there's confidence building that's done among certainly the Canadian Lumber Standards Accreditation Board does a lot of international, negotiations and workies. They share the standards. They share what's going on. They've just recently been peer evaluated by the Inter-American Accreditation Cooperation, and they we're hoping in August they will be a signatory to the IAF agreement for accreditation of product certifiers. Very narrow, of course. They're only dealing with people that certify lumber. They've gone through the process. They've trained their folks. They've trained the certification bodies. And then, of course, the certification bodies are going to be checked out by the accreditation body to see whether or not you did understand 70,065 and how you're supposed to go about doing the certification of lumber. There's need for cooperation, whether or not it's from accreditation or face-to-face. The regulators of, the building code authorities talk to each other. I'm pretty sure that it was the ICC in the United States, International Code Council, negotiates with the Canadian counterparts about how should we, what are the specifications and requirements for certain types of lumber that are usable for building or whatever, plywood. They can do this without accreditation for the United States because there's a lot of confidence between the United States and Canada with regard to that. But when you're shipping these lumber across the Pacific to Japan in particular, Japan was pretty demanding, I guess is what the word is, as well as Australia. Your accreditation, do you meet this international standard for accreditation? Well, he can't say that he does until he gets this peer evaluation. The decision should be made in August in the Dominican Republic, and then they would be automatically accepted by IAF because the IAC's peer evaluation process is accepted at IAF. Anyway, that's where we're at with where accreditation has a role. Some countries use it, many countries don't, but I think it's growing, particularly in Asia, it's growing. There's a lot more recognition of accreditation as an integral part of quality infrastructure.
We've talked about the impact accreditation has on the larger macro level. Let's turn it the other way for a second, and let's talk about the impact accreditation has on individual laboratories and quality of testing. You've been involved with accreditation for a long time, so how do you see the impact that accreditation has on the quality of the testing laboratory itself?
Well, I have to be biased about this.
Of course.
I
As am I.
I don't have any objective data, frankly. It says an unaccredited laboratory, an accredited laboratory, and whether or not unaccredited laboratories can be perfectly good about what they're doing if they are assessed and there's found to be deficiencies in the processing requirements or the actual following the test methods. Gosh damn, then accreditation helps the lab to make sure they are not cutting corners. I've seen results in concrete testing labs early on where assessors would find that labs would be faking. They take the 3 cylinders and only test one and then make up the numbers for the other 2 and don't actually break the other 2. And of course, that's very serious. If they do that, their accreditation is really suspect. So I think accreditation definitely encourages people to do the right thing and being very serious about whatever's required in the process of the test. Follow the test. Don't cut corners. Don't try to get the job over quickly. That is unacceptable and causes possible erroneous results that get reported to the client, and then things happen in a very bad way, possibly.
We are in a low bid environment, and if people are not careful about who they award these contracts to, you're going to have more problems. But yeah, I agree with what you said. An unaccredited laboratory can be as good as an accredited laboratory, but you don't know. You don't know. There's no accountability. There's no third-party objective evaluation. So while it is possible, we haven't found a whole lot of laboratories come into our program that are not accredited that find it to be an easy process.
Yeah.
That gives me some confidence that the accreditation process has some value.
Yeah, and when they sit down and say, well, document what's our policy, what are our objectives, what are the processes we need to follow to make sure we're providing consistently good data? How do we treat our people? It provides some discipline.
Right.
And we haven't had any recent disasters in this area, frankly, and so things are being done professionally better, clearly. So I'm very happy to say accreditation is very valuable for the labs themselves and their customers. I mean, ultimately, the customers have to make decisions based on test data. And if the test data is wrong, it can cause severely costly mistakes, including deaths. And that's particularly why accreditation is valuable for the life and death tests and certifications. So anyway, that's my opinion. And I think the laboratories who get accredited feel more comfortable. They get a professional, experienced assessors that come out there and really help them to abide by what they need to do to provide consistently good results. When the lab is successful in getting accredited, the working group, the technicians, they feel very proud that they've accomplished something that may not be as easy as some people suggest. That it's not necessarily easy getting accredited, and certain kind of testing is maybe more difficult than others. I know most, actually, because of the development of concrete and thermal insulation, Construction materials testing is probably I'm most familiar with, but also environmental testing, food testing, calibration are other areas where I've gone out and at least witnessed assessments.
Accreditation covers all kinds of different topics,
but
right?
Your accreditation is particularly important to make sure that building products, the buildings themselves, roadwork, bridges are actually not going to fail with people in them or people on them. And that's a huge deal. So I greatly respect the AASHTO effort to accredit all the laboratories that are in this business, whether it's in the United States or maybe they have some clients internationally.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. And we do. It's funny because, you have some people who are really skeptical or jaded and say, oh, you're just trying to make more money or have more customers. It's like, that is never the objective. I mean, we want more oversight. We want more assurance that what is being paved or being put into a structure is what it is supposed to be, and to protect the public interest. And that's about it. I mean, if it's 2,000 labs, if it's 1,000 labs, if it's 500 labs, whatever it is, we just want to make sure it's done properly. And I think we've made some improvements, and it is hard telling, especially some of the things that you mentioned, the cases of fraud, misrepresentation of information, taking shortcuts. That stuff can be really hard to determine in a short visit, but we certainly do try to identify those things when we can and take action. And I think that's hard for all accrediting bodies to be able to take action that they need to take, especially in a competitive environment where they could go to a lower quality alternative. If there isn't some kind of, back to your ILAC recognition, if there isn't some kind of assurance of consistency, it can be really difficult for people.
Leveling the playing field.
Right.
So that competition among laboratories is fair, and that everybody has to live up to the same standard. To me, is the justification for what you guys are doing and why accreditation is valuable. Levels the playing field.
Absolutely. Well, Pete, thank you so much for your time. One last thing, I'd like you to give you an opportunity to just tell people how to reach out to you if they are interested in hiring you as a consultant. Or
you could search the website iqueis.com, iqeis.com.
So we'll have a link to your website for sure, and email, so people can reach out to you. Thank you for your time today, Pete. I know you've got a lot going on, so I appreciate the history lesson. This was really fascinating for me as a accrediting body director. To hear the background of how all these things developed was really interesting. So thanks for sharing that, sharing your time and expertise with us today.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Kim.
Thanks for listening to AASHTO Resource Q&A. If you'd like to be a guest or just submit a question, send us an email at podcast@ashtoresource.org or call Brian at 240-436-4820. For other news and related content, check out AASHTO Resource's social media accounts or go to ashtoresource.org.